Isaiah has been a difficult book for me and many. There's so much of it which is poetic language, and it needs an awful lot of kind of grappling with. But as I'm really not good at that, they've given me an easier bit here, which is nice. So in the middle of Isaiah, right in the middle really, there are 4 chapters about King Hezekiah. And I get to do the first 2, and Matt will do the next 2 next week. He's got the more difficult ones because he's very brave. But let's just give a little update then. So I'm just doing Isaiah 36 and 7 and Hezekiah. And you need to know that he was a king, came to the throne when he was 25. There's a story about him in 2 Kings, 2 Kings, chapter 18 and around about there. And you can read a little wider. But the words of Isaiah are actually in 2 Kings. It's word for word in 2 Kings as well. So what we're looking at is in the historical records of Israel. But he came to the throne at age 25 and is recorded as doing good things in the eyes of the Lord. And what he actually did was he discovered, or he already knew, that there were all sorts of false worship had grown up in Judah. And they have worship of Baal and Asherah poles and various things like that. And he started dismantling them all and took them out. He even found that the Jews had started burning incense, it says, to the bronze snake that there was in Exodus. Moses was given a snake made of bronze. He held it up and people received healing as they looked at it. And they'd still got this snake. And people were now burning incense to the snake rather than the God who had provided it. So Hezekiah, quite rightly, said, that's not what we should be doing. This has become an idol. So he destroyed that too, which is why no one's ever found it. But it was destroyed by Hezekiah. He did the right things. However, to the north, the Assyrian Empire was really on the move, had taken over all sorts of places, had already taken over the northern kingdom, the bit we call Israel, or Ephraim, and various other surrounding places. The Assyrian Empire become quite big. The center was in Nineveh, which you'll probably remember from your Sunday school stories is where Jonah was sent to speak to the people there. And but that was the center of the Assyrian Empire. And the new king there, Sennacherib, had decided the empire wasn't big enough and he was going to expand it further. And he was annoyed, I think, by the little kingdom of Judah, which was sort of down to the south of where he'd got to. And it records that he had already attacked the 46 fortified cities in Judah, which is a lot. The biggest of which, I think, outside Jerusalem, was called Lachish. And that comes in this story. And we'll see. But I thought what we do, as we've failed to do this on previous times because there's just so much Isaiah we're trying to get through, is we're actually going to go through the actual passage. I'm going to read it. I was going to ask someone, but there's too many difficult names, so I thought I'll be embarrassed rather than someone else. So here we go. So starting in chapter 36, if you have those books with the notes, that's the ESV. I think I've got the ESV on the screen as well, so it should be the same words. Here we go. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. And the king of Assyria sent the Rabshakeh. Now, just need to explain. If you've got the NIV, it says, I can't remember what it does. It interprets that. Nobody knows exactly what that meant, but he was someone important, and he seems to have a name, and he's just referred to as Rabshakeh. And if I haven't pronounced that right, sorry, but I don't think anyone really knows. But anyway, so he just appears as the main speaker on behalf of the king of Assyria. So the king of Assyria sent the Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem with a great army. And he stood by the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field. And there came out to him Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, who was over the household, that's in Jerusalem, and Shebna the secretary, and Joah the son of Asaph, the recorder. And the Rabshakeh said to them, say to Hezekiah, thus says the great king, the king of Assyria, on what do you rest this trust of yours? Do you think that mere words are strategy and power for war? In whom do you now trust? You have rebelled against me. Behold, you are trusting in Egypt, that broken reed of a staff, which will pierce the hand of any man who leans on it. Such is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to all who trust in him. But if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and altars Hezekiah has removed, saying to Judah and to Jerusalem, you shall worship before this altar? Come now, make a wager with my master, the king of Assyria. I will give you 2,000 horses if you are able to, on your part, set riders on them. How then can you repulse a single captain among the least of my master's servants when you trust in Egypt for chariots and for horsemen? Moreover, is it without the Lord, that I have come up against this land to destroy it? The Lord said to me, go up against this land and destroy it. Then Eliakim, Shebna, and Joah said to Rabshakeh, please speak to your servants in Aramaic, for we understand it. Do not speak to us in the language of Judah, within the hearing of the people who are on the wall. But the Rabshakeh said, has my master sent me to speak these words to your master and to you, and not to the men sitting on the wall who are doomed with you to eat their own dung and drink their own urine? Pleasant. Then the Rabshakeh stood and called out in a loud voice in the language of Judah, hear the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. Thus says the king, do not let Hezekiah deceive you, for he will not be able to deliver you. Do not let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord by saying the Lord will surely deliver us. The city will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Do not listen to Hezekiah, for thus says the king of Assyria, make your peace with me and come out to me. Then each of you will eat of his own vine, one of his own fig tree, each one of you will drink the water of his own cistern, until I come out and take you away to a land like your own, a land of grain and wine, a land of bread and vineyards. Beware lest Hezekiah mislead you by saying, the Lord will deliver us. Has any of the gods of the nations delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? Have they delivered Samaria out of my hand? Who among all the gods of all these lands have delivered the lands out of my hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand? But they were silent and answered him not a word, for the king's command was, do not answer him. Then Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, who was over the household, and Shebna the secretary, and Joah the son of Asaph the recorder, came to Hezekiah with their clothes torn and told him the words of the Rabshakeh. As soon as King Hezekiah heard it, he tore his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth and went into the house of the Lord. And he sent Eliakim, who was over the household, and Shebna the secretary, and the senior priest covered with sackcloth, to the prophet Isaiah, the son of Amos. They said to him, thus says Hezekiah, this day is a day of distress, of rebuke and of disgrace. Children have come to the point of birth. There's no strength to bring them forth. It may be that the Lord your God will hear the words of the Rabshakeh, whom his master the king of Assyria has sent to mock the living God, and he will rebuke the words that the Lord God has heard. Therefore lift up your prayer for the remnant that is left. Okay, I'll just pause there for a second. Here's a map that may or may not help you because it's probably too small to see. But Assyria is that great big, well, the purple bit in the middle there, and it's basically expanded over all the green bit. And Judah is that little brown bit at the bottom. And Lachish is a city that's south of Jerusalem. And that's where they'd got to. They'd taken over the fortified cities, and Jerusalem is basically surrounded by a massive army. And the message that Sennacherib brings is actually a fulfillment of all the warnings we've had in all the previous chapters about what God has said is going to happen to his people because of the way they have acted and their failure to follow him. There had been king after king who had done deals with goodness knows how many other people in different places, and even that Sennacherib is assuming that Hezekiah is going to do a deal with Egypt to protect him. You can see where Egypt is down there, and I think he had designs on Egypt as well at some point. But in fact, we'd already heard from Roger last week that Egypt is making a deal with Egypt is an alliance with death, or a covenant with death, it says in the earlier chapters. And so Hezekiah already knew not to do that. So that wasn't his plan. And Hezekiah knew he wasn't going to trust in the horsemen and chariots. And Sennacherib also suggests that because Hezekiah has gone around removing these false worship places, these altars and things all over the country, that somehow his God was now reduced, because in Sennacherib's area, the bigger the god, the more spectacular his places to be worshipped. So there were, buildings and altars all over the place, all to Sennacherib's god, and he assumed that quantity was what was needed, not quality. But they were false gods, and Hezekiah had already dealt with those and idols, and he called the people back into the presence of God in the one place where God promised to be, his temple. And then Sennacherib tries to frighten the people with warnings of siege and destruction, which is the stuff about eating their own dung and drinking their own urine. He was going to besiege the city of Jerusalem. And then he offers them security of being exiled into his kingdom, which is just, marvelous by all accounts. And then he says that the God of Israel is no different to the other gods who have already been destroyed by him and his army in the region. And it's interesting how Hezekiah responds to this, because the other kings would have sent people out immediately to find an ally. He doesn't do that. He puts on sackcloth and ashes and goes to the temple to plead with God. And he also sends word to Isaiah and asks him to pray. And you may recall that this little route that these people have arrived on has appeared already. It's what's it called? Something about a washer's way and stuff, and the aqueduct that leads into Jerusalem. And it appears in King Ahaz's time. And Isaiah takes that route, and he says this is what's going to happen. And he goes with his sons. He goes with a son called God is with us, and a son called A Remnant Will Return or will Remain. And that was the very place. And there Sennacherib has come, and he's effectively about to fulfill that. And Hezekiah has actually, when his appeal to Isaiah, he says to Isaiah, perhaps the Lord God will protect the remnant that remain. He's quoting the name of this child who he would have known some of this stuff. He grew up in the palace. And so now I need to go on to what happens next, really. But I think there's some... Yeah, let's do the next bit, and then we'll come back to that. So we're carrying on here in chapter 37. When the servants of King Hezekiah came to Isaiah, Isaiah said to them, "Say to your master, thus says the Lord, do not be afraid because of the words you have heard, with which the young men of the king of Syria have reviled me. Behold, I will put a spirit in him, so that he will hear a rumor and return to his own land, and I will make him fall by the sword in his own land." You notice that Isaiah doesn't actually pray, which is what he'd asked for. Hezekiah had asked him to do. He just says, no, I've already given you this. This is what God is going to do. He is completely confident in what God has previously said through him. And then it says, the Rabshakeh returned and found the king of Assyria fighting against him in Libnah, for he had heard the king had left Lachish. Now the king heard concerning, I had trouble with this one, Tirhakah, king of Cush, and he has set out to fight against you. And when he heard it, he sent messengers to Hezekiah saying, "Thus shall you speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah. Do not let your God in whom you trust deceive you by promising that Jerusalem will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Behold, you have heard what the kings of Assyria have done to all the lands, devoting them to destruction. And shall you be delivered? Have the gods of the nations delivered them? The nations that my father destroyed, Gozan, Haran, Rezeph, and the people of Eden who were in Telassar. Where is the king of Hamath, the king of Arpad, the king of the city of Seraphaim, the king of Hene, or the king of Iphah?" Hezekiah received the letter from the hand of the messengers and read it. And Hezekiah went up to the house of the Lord and spread it before the Lord. And Hezekiah prayed to the Lord, "O God, O Lord of hosts, God of Israel, enthroned above the cherubim, you are the God, you alone, all the kingdoms of the earth, you have made heaven and earth. Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see and hear all the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to mock the living God. Truly, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste all the nations and their lands and have cast their gods into the fire, but they were no gods, but the work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore they were destroyed. So now, O Lord our God, save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are the Lord. This is quite a different thing this king is doing. Hezekiah is actually saying some important things compared to all who've gone before, really. And he says this, really, there are some important lessons for us. Previous kings had trusted in their own skills, their negotiating abilities. They'd ignored what Isaiah had brought. In fact, Isaiah, really, no one has listened to Isaiah at all up to this point. But Hezekiah trusted God. And the previous kings were concerned primarily about defending their kingdom. But Hezekiah asked God to demonstrate his power, and that last verse there, so that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone, Lord, are God. And Hezekiah realized that the reason the true God was not feared, the reason that Sennacherib could say no different from any other God, was that the people had failed to represent him. Their job, because God had chosen them, was to show what it was to serve the living God and how this was the true God, the one and only God, and all these false gods serving them did you no good at all. But they were supposed to be different, and they weren't. They were indistinguishable from the nations around them, and King Sennacherib thought, just another nation, I'm going to wipe them out. Their God is meaningless, has no defense against my armies and my greatness. And then, let's carry on with the passage, and we'll come back to, I don't know whether I'm going to read all of this. This could take a while. Sorry, I did do some notes. There we go. These are the things that he did. That's good. Just said all that. Okay. Then Isaiah, son of Amos, sent to Hezekiah, saying, Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, because you have prayed to me concerning Sennacherib, king of Assyria, this is the word that Lord has spoken concerning him. And how are we doing? Yeah, let's read it. See. She despises you. She scorns you. So this is God speaking to Sennacherib about his people, really. So she despises you, she scorns you, the virgin daughter of Zion. She wags her head before you, the daughter of Jerusalem. Whom have you mocked and reviled? Against whom have you raised your voice and lifted your eyes to the heights? Against the Holy One of Israel. By your servants you have mocked the Lord, and you have said, with my many chariots I have gone up on the heights, the mountains, to the far recesses of Lebanon, to cut down its tallest cedars, its choicest cypresses, to come to its remotest height, its most fruitful forest. I dug wells and drank waters, to dry up with the sole of my foot all the streams of Egypt. Have you not heard that I determined it long ago? I planned from days of old what now I bring to pass, that you should make fortified cities crash into heaps of ruins, while their inhabitants, shorn of strength, are dismayed and confounded, and have become like plants of the field and like tender grass on the housetops, blighted before it is grown. I know you're sitting down and you're going out and you're coming in and you're raging against me. Because you have raged against me and your complacency has come to my ears, I will put my hook in your nose, my bit in your mouth, and I will turn you back on the way by which you came. So that's what God's, first of all, through Isaiah, is saying to Sennacherib. And now he addresses Hezekiah again, and he says to Hezekiah, and this shall be the sign for you. This year you should eat wheat that it grows of itself, and in the second year what springs from that. In the third year sow and reap and plant vineyards and eat their fruit. And the surviving remnant of the house of Judah shall again take root downwards, bear fruit upwards. For out of Jerusalem shall go a remnant, and out of Mount Zion a band of survivors. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Therefore, thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into the city, or shoot an arrow there, or come before it with a shield, or cast a siege mound against it. By the way that he came, by the same he shall return. And he shall not come into this city, declares the Lord, for I will defend this city to save it for my own sake, and for the sake of my servant David. And then the story goes back to the historical record, and this is what happened. And the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when people arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead bodies. Then Sennacherib, king of Assyria, departed and returned home and lived at Nineveh. And he was worshipping in the house of Nisroch, his god. Adramelech and Sharezer, his sons, struck him down with the sword. And after they escaped into the land of Ararat, Esarhaddon, his son, reigned in his place. So that was a bit of a swift end, really. So he heard, in Kings as well, he heard a rumor that there was something going on. He needed to get back to Nineveh. And when he did, two of his own sons killed him, which was a popular pastime in Assyria, from what I gather. But he lost his life because God says, you've spoken against me. You've actually insulted my name and my greatness. And there is an historical record that the massive Assyrian army, they did lose huge numbers. It was presumed to be some kind of plague. All we know is that it actually happened. That's outside the Bible. 185,000 people died, soldiers died. God judged the Assyrian empire, and particularly the king, just as he said he would. There are some challenges for us. By the way, the Assyrian Empire didn't go on much beyond this. It got taken over by the Babylonian Empire, and we don't have an Assyrian Empire now. It's difficult to kind of locate where it really was. It's gone without a trace. And so that is what happens when people stand up in the face of God, stand up to God like that, and don't recognize that he is not like other gods. But then I got thinking about, well, what might we learn from this? So here we go. And I've been really challenged by this week. When there is a crisis, which camp am I in, was the question I was wrestling with. Am I like the kings who try everything I can, use my own skills, and try and sort it out as my first course of action? You know, not necessarily go and negotiate with the Egyptians, but something like that. Where I think, oh, I can fix this. You know, yes, it's a problem, but I can fix this. And so there will be things in our lives where we feel we're surrounded. And our first response, I have to say mine, I've been really challenged, has not been to go before God and say, God, have mercy. The second thing is, Hezekiah was reminded by Isaiah that he already knew what God had promised to do. And he knew that he needed to turn to God. He knew that the people hadn't actually represented God correctly, and that he himself was the problem as the king. And so he actually decided he would trust God. His predecessors did not do that. And so the next question I had is, do I recognize my responsibility in the mess that I'm currently in? Do I actually blame anybody else but me? And I felt God really kind of stir me about that too. Not every crisis we come across is of our own doing, but actually God is interested in us and the relationship with us. And so there's a bit in there. We say it in the Lord's Prayer. It said to lead us not into temptation. And I think it's translated a more modern version of the liturgy as don't bring us to a time of hard testing. But actually testing is what is required. There was testing going on here for Judah and for Hezekiah. There's testing for us. And God brings about what he is wanting in us through that. And so we have a responsibility in everything about how we react. But here's the biggie for me. Are we more concerned for God's honor than our own comfort? Are we driven by, well, you know, I'm in a mess, I need this help, I need this? Or are we concerned like Hezekiah was? God, your name is not being held up here. Your name, you have been insulted by this king. Consider what he said and respond. Hezekiah doesn't really even ask for rescue as such. He asks Isaiah to pray and see if God will do that. But he goes to the temple and he lays out what has been given to him, the letter effectively from Sennacherib, and says, look at what he's saying about you. Lord, do something to restore your name, that you would be glorified. And I thought, it's not always my first thought. And sometimes we get into really difficult situations in our lives, and actually the glory of God is it should be all-consuming for us. We don't really live like that, but most of the time, or a lot of the time. There's one of the stories in the New Testament where Jesus heals a man born blind. And I just love it. I refer to it often. But there's a man who certainly as an adult, and he has been born blind, and he comes to Jesus, and Jesus makes some mud on the ground, spits on the ground, puts it on his eyes, tells him to go off and wash in the pool. And so he doesn't even see Jesus, but then he is healed. And his disciples say to Jesus, well, was it his sin or his parents' sin that caused this? Both of which are just bizarre from my point of view. The man was born blind. So I suppose it could have been a judgment on his parents. You're going to have a child. But certainly his own sin would seem to be ruled out mostly in what happened. And Jesus' response is that this was so that I would be glorified, so my Father in heaven would be glorified. The glory of God, I thought, this is very difficult to get your head around, but God is perfect in every way. God is glorious in every way. He is an amazing creator. He's created a universe which is way beyond our imagination in terms of its size and complexity. And he is an amazing God. And what's more, he has actually come as a man, even more amazingly. He's come and lived amongst us. He's suffered as we do in order to win us over. He's demonstrated his love by laying down his life for us. This is an incredible God. And he is holy and good and completely unapproachable in normal circumstances, but he's made it so that we can approach him. And we are destined, if we are trusting in Jesus, if we have faith in him, to live a life that will continue into eternity, and we will worship him forever. Worship of God is actually the be-all and end-all of existence. That's what it's about. And it's not to live on this earth and have a nice or as comfortable a time as we can. It is actually to learn to be worshippers of God here, which will carry on into eternity. I was explaining to my little girl about Jean's death, and we've prayed for Jean lots over the last few months. Saying she's gone to be with Jesus, and she'll be able to worship him again in the way that she struggled to because of her illness. And saying that's actually what we're called to. And I can remember talking with Jean, and I used to love playing in the band when she played piano, and her arthritis in her fingers prevented her from playing. And it was such a sadness, and I remember just joking with her, but one day you will be able to do that again perfectly. You will have a perfect working body and be able to worship exactly as you know you can. And Lily, excuse me, I'm just going to tell a story. I said that after I'd spoken, I wanted to sing the song "Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus," and I just love it, although I've apparently learnt the Lauren Daigle version of it, for those who know Lauren Daigle, which we can't sing. We're going to do something else. But Lily said that after I put that in the list of songs for this week, that she played that to Jean, and Jean joined in. She sang, and they'd had no other response from her. She's just at the end of her life, but she sang that. We are made to worship God. It's in our whole being, and so that is the priority. And for God's name to be lifted up is an end in itself. And Jesus says, seek first my kingdom, and all the other stuff will be added to you. And Hezekiah sought first God's name to be honored. That was his priority. And that, for me, that was the real challenge. And this is the verse that I keep coming back to time and time again. It seems to occur in all sorts of places. People say it to me. I was speaking to someone and said, this has meant a lot to me. Oh, we started our service with that this week. And let me read it, and then it says, therefore, since this is from, Hebrews chapter 12, we've just had a long chapter 11 of all the people of faith, and then the writer says this. He says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith. And for me, I think I found that in every crisis, in every day of life, I focus on the things that hinder and the sin that so easily entangles. And I don't fix my eyes on Jesus. And it's so obvious, isn't it? It's written there in Hebrews. Turns out that it's All Saints school prayer is those verses. So I've been taught it by my daughter too. But it's such an obvious thing. But Hezekiah fixed his eyes on God. He thought nothing of what was going on other than, God, defend the people you have chosen, lift up your name and deal with this king who is, wiping out everyone ahead of him. Deal with him because he has blasphemed you, is the summary of what Hezekiah prayed. And so for me, am I keeping my eyes fixed on Jesus was the challenge. Are we doing that? The words say, which we're not going to sing, but the verse says, turn your eyes upon Jesus, look full in his wonderful face, and the things of earth will grow strangely dim in the light of his glory and grace.